Okay, so now we're ready to start building our form. So it's awesome because we don't have a lot of things to do before we can actually see awesome results. The reason is we've been connected to this platform that allows us to have an entire framework of tools already developed for us, from charts to panels to tables that have dynamic sorting to form elements. So what I'm going to encourage you doing is how to essentially use these type of frameworks, and there's philosophies behind that could help you. So we're going to look at example this forms.html file, which has a lot of the components that we're going to need to build, and then we're going to pick them one by one. So the first thing we want to do is look at this page. We have the blank, and then pretty much we're going to change that information as well. And then here we have the text input that we can start placing inside. So one thing is important is to observe how they structured this page in order to be able to recreate and have a fully functional template. And I can see this one here as a placeholder. And then there's other kinds here. We have checkboxes, inline checkboxes, radio boxes. We have a select. We have those submit buttons. So we're all set to get going with this. So we've opened forms.html, and then we're going to try to scroll down to the area that we can recognize as being the text input there, the first one on the page. So this, we're still in the menu, so we'll just keep scrolling. We can see the page wrapper, so we can kind of get an idea it's going to be close. But here's the idea. Now, if you compare what you have on this page, you see you have the page wrapper, it closes. Then you have a row, then you have a column large 12, and then you have the H1 tag with a page header in it. So basically, I've played with this before, but if you haven't, understand that a row is what determines a horizontal rule, which means that when you create rows, things basically don't live beside each other. And when you create columns, well, now these are actually columns, so they can live beside each other, and it's based on a grid system. So I'm sure one of these pages probably has the example of the grid, and then you could see the different columns and how they can coexist beside each other. Okay, so yesterday we used a bit of a different system, so hopefully we're not going to encounter any problems. But we're just going to copy the same as the one inside of forms. So you see that under the row, it closes the row and then starts creating another row with a column large 12, and then now it has a panel. So I'm going to try to bring the attention here to this part, because that's really what we need to repeat first before anything else. So we'll go here, and then we will add this under the closing row. This is why leaving those comments that they made is pretty useful. Okay. So now we're going to bring this in 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we can close it ourselves. I mean, we don't need a copy paste to close a div tag. And then we can also add that closing row comment there just to keep things nice and consistent. So now we're going here, and then let's look at the form again, and we can see this panel. So this is called a panel. The reason why I know is I've looked at all of these pages and tried to get familiar with the possibilities before starting, and you can see the panels are clearly indicated here. So we don't need a panel. We really just need to have a form. So we're going to place the form in here. And then here we have the form group, text input, and so we're going to grab this one. And it becomes really easy now to see what kind of inputs we're going to keep on adding to this. So we're going to add this inside, and we're also going to indent the form. So then again, we just close the form. And before we get too crazy about this, let's just save, upload, Control-Shift-U, and then check on the browser So we see now our text input takes the entire space. We probably don't need all of that, so we can split the difference, make it 6. So that's much better. Okay, so now we can start really filling up the kind of information that we're expecting the admin to fill here. So first things first, this is going to be add album page. And then inside the text box, we're going to ask the person to enter the artist name. And then they're going to write it here. And then this is a statement to help us understand, but I think everybody knows what's an artist name. So the next part here is, I'm so used to the XHTML closing there, I was trying to add it there, but it's not required in HTML5. So here, to be able to submit this form, we're going to need to have the name of the field, and we're going to need to have an ID for the field, and we'll simply call it artist. Okay, so we can keep going. Actually, pretty much the other ones are going to be text boxes as well, so we can copy on this one and tag along. So album name, and we're just going to call this album. And then the next thing is the year. We're just going to call it year. So you see, it becomes pretty much a simple task once you're organized like this. Year. And then now for the genres, I'd be tempted to add a different control, maybe something that this tool would have for us, like a select. So if we would make a list of the kind of genres that are possible to be added, it would make it much more consistent, so every day somebody doesn't invent a new genre, so it would help kind of sort our albums. If we have a new one, we can come here and add it. So we're going to go into this forms page, and we're going to locate the drop down menu, which is actually a select tag, and you can see here a form group with a select in it. So we're going to grab this. You can see the structure is very simple to copy, very simple to understand, and the entire design is done for us. So great benefits here in terms of speed. So this is going to be the genre, and I can see the year here being duplicated, so we're not going to need that again. And then again, for the select, we're going to need a name and an ID. Okay. Then for the options, we're just going to write our different kind of genres. So I have electronic, and then I'm going to go to my list of albums. I have R&B, soul. I have a slash and an and here, so we need to put the constant here, ampersand, oops, sorry, AMP. And so we have a hip-hop rap, and then we have soundtrack, and then we have reggae. Okay, so we don't necessarily need to set a value, because what happens is if you use these are going to be the value. Probably the only one I'd be worried about is this one, because it has the entity. So I'm just going to say value, and then R&B, and I can actually put it when it's inside a string here, R&B slash soul, just to make sure that's what I have in my database and not this. Okay, so kind of important here. And then we have one last field, I think, is for the album path. So we'll just call that the URL. And we'll call it the URL. Okay, so we'll upload this. Now I'm going too fast. We'll refresh, and then we can see add album, album name, artist name, album name, the year, the genre, and then the URL. So the next thing we need is a button so that we can click on it and submit our form. So we're going to go here and see how they do it. Now we know how to create a button, but sometimes they have classes and things that we can use that would help us. So we're just going to add this button here. Now once you have the button and it's of a type submit, then when you click it, you're going to add an album. Okay, so the idea here is that you need to set where this form is going to submit and in which kind of way it's going to submit. So you set the method, and we want to post this information, and the action. Now what happens is if we leave the action empty, it's going to submit to the same page that it came from. Okay, so that's actually pretty good for us, because we could start coding the part that adds the album up here and make this very useful. So what I usually do now at this point is that this is the time where I could really see a separation from the index and the role of this page. So maybe at the beginning I would have normally created those pages first, but it's not too late to just start getting organized and say File, Save As. An example, this will be the album add.php page. And here we could say example admin, or example add album from the admin page, and then the app name is album, but we've already said that and we took it away. So now we have our button. Let's just do a test of this new page that we created. Let's preview that in Chrome. So we can see everything seems to be alright. We're ready to fill in, and when we click, it's submitted the page to itself. Now here's the trick that I do, is that I would want to also control the kind of actions that I'm going to conduct by having a query string here at the top. So a query string usually ends here, and then you can start creating parameters and give them values like question mark ID is equal to 1. Now in this case we want to create that parameter to make sure that we have different options behind the scenes. The reason is sometimes you want to create just one file for albums, and then be able to control what displays on it. In our case, it's already pretty clear what we want to do with album add. So we're going to add a query string, and then we're going to call it the action, and we're going to set it to insert. So that way we can validate that this action is really what we want to do once we get that information posted back to us. Okay? Because example, think about this actually. This is a really good example of the reason why this could become really useful, because think about this here. If we were to load information in these fields with an actual album name, and the purpose of this form wasn't necessarily to create but to update and be able to change the values, nothing would really change from this layout, but the action would be different. Okay, so this is actually the reason why we do this like that, because it makes the reusability of this particular component a lot more useful. So we can use the form in the context of adding, and we can use the form in the context of updating. So another thing that's important that we need to address here is the kind of security that we need to place behind a form like this. So if we would leave this at this stage, here's the scenario, or the potential scenario, if this page is open to the World Wide Web. Now most of the time these admin pages are behind some kind of a security system where you need a login and password to get in. But it's not uncommon that you use similar techniques to create a contact form, for instance. So meaning that if this page was a contact form, if this page was an album add form, from an HTML and a PHP perspective, they're really the same. Okay, so now how do you make sure that you actually clicked on this button down here on this page from this website, and that it's not just another website that created an HTML form with the same fields trying to post to your page. Okay, which is very common, and this would happen if you don't do the next step. This would be possible actually if you don't do the next step. So we're going to create what I call a key field, and we're going to put it inside an input type hidden, which means that it's an input type, which means we can submit it back to ourselves, but it's not visible in any way, shape, or form. So input, and then the ID of the input is going to be key, and the name of the input is going to be key, and the value now is going to be something that we shouldn't let our users guess. Okay, which means that we're going to put something in here in a form of an encrypted string, but only we are knowing, or only we are aware of what this string is. So only we can recreate it. Now, encryption sometimes varies. You can have different encryptions. Some of them can generate messages that are always different, but the message is the same, and only if you have the key to decrypt the message will you be able to decrypt the message. Now, what happens with this particular encryption that we're going to use is that it's a fantastic one that always generates the exact same string for the kind of thing that you encrypt. So if you encrypt the sentence hello world, it's always going to generate the same string. So this is very useful for us in this case, because if we put a random string there, it's going to be pretty hard to regenerate that same random string. So we're going to use PHP to do that, and then probably this is not the first time we're going to do this, so maybe I would suggest to observe later on ideas to place this inside a function, but for now we're going to put the code right in here. So we're going to echo and the MD5 function from PHP. Okay, and basically this is the function that will create the encrypted string. Now, what that function requires is you to give it a string. So what we want to do is we want to be able to create something custom that we only would be aware of. So for instance, we could create something like just hello, this is a secret key, and then basically on the other side we could use hello, this is a secret key to validate the access. But I have a particular thing I've been doing, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. We use server variables, and we put the host, which is basically equivalent in this case to this local.admin value. So we say local.admin, and then we also add to it the fact that you're on a certain page. So for instance, server, and then PHP self. Now if you want a reference to these functions, I will create one in just a minute through the info.php function. And then usually what I do is whatever action is supposed to be happening here, I also give it to the MD5. Okay, so this is pretty clean. Basically what it does is it adds the server, it adds the page, and it adds the action into that string, and we'll create something pretty custom based on that. So let's just do a test and see what this comes out to. Hopefully there's no errors. Now let's look at the page source, and then we can see if we scroll down, actually we do have an error on line 22. We used host. So if it's not server host, then let's check PHP info. So we're going to create a new file called info.php. Now by the way, I'm showing you guys to create this file, but I also want to issue the warning one last time. Do not leave this page on the remote server at any time, okay? Because this is a page that could expose your settings and expose your extension. You don't want to do that. So we're going to see info.php. Actually, we don't want to see the source, but we want to see the actual file. And so this is what the PHP info looks like. If we scroll down all the way to the bottom, we can see the PHP variables, and it's HTTP host, not host on alone. Okay, so we're going to replace that here with HTTP host and then PHP self. So you see these are the values that we use. Okay, so we can update this, and then let's have one last look at the source code of this page, and then we can see as we get close we have a particular string generated, and that's custom. Only we know what's inside of that string. Okay, so it means that one of the first thing we'll do on the server side is we'll actually check that this key is present in the form, and we'll also check that the value of the key is something that we can generate, which would basically eliminate a lot of the possible hacks into this particular form. Okay, so now this page, because we don't do anything special, when we click on it, it's going to submit to itself. So we can start building the code right here to be able to process that. So we could say if is set, and then example put post, and then look for the key inside of the post array. So this is something that we could do, right? Now this would mean that you've posted the form and that somewhat the key is present. Doesn't mean that it's valid, but you're going to start adding a lot of PHP code to this file. Sometimes it could get pretty busy. So my suggestion is to just try to stay organized. So example, what I usually do is at this level on the page, I say if get action. So if the get action is set, which means it's from the URL that it's coming, and post key. So usually, key. So usually that's pretty much a good indicator for me that you've pressed the submit button and that there's going to somewhat be an action involved. Now usually what I try to do, so I'm more specific, I say and get action is equal to insert. So now I know what you want to do. I know that you're trying to do it, and I know that you're probably from the good side of things. Okay, so this is a good starting location here. The next thing we need to do is we need to validate that the key is valid. Okay, so we're going to do this simply by recreating this string. Okay, so we can actually copy it here. Now, one of the things that I would just point out in this example here is how you can actually use variables to do this. So example here, instead of echo MD5 and then put the entire thing there, what we could do is we could actually store and just echo the key, right? And then we could actually go up here with our variables along the other ones and just say this is the key, right? So it keeps everything a whole lot cleaner. The only thing is that this action insert there. Okay, so we can hard code it or we can use get action. That depends. But or actually, here's another idea. Part of the key, like so. Part of the key would be the first prefix, and then we could say MD5, the key, and the action, just like it used to be before. So that way it's a lot leaner. Okay, look at the code now, it's a lot cleaner. Echo MD5 key and then action equals insert. And then on this side here we can also validate. We could say if, and then MD5 from the key plus, and then this time what we're going to do is say if I look down here, I have, okay, so I have the question mark, action is equal to, and then get action. So this way you do need to have the same thing in the get over here to generate that key. And that I do this really because I want to make sure that if you're trying to fool around with the URL thinking that you can get into this by changing the values in the URL, then there's really no way that this is ever going to work. Okay, so because you think about this, if I just put the key here, well, you're almost past, right? So you could try to pass the key in the URL and see if that can get it to work. So we don't want to do that. Okay, next thing. By the way, this is possible for people to guess this. Okay, so another thing that people would normally do is add some kind of a prefix. So album, app. Okay, so now usually that's how it works. You have common things, and then you have also something that you can only guess that nobody would know, that's only on the server. Okay, then it's easy to add it here. And sometimes what we do is we define that as a constant in our utils.php, which I'm going to create, by the way, very soon. So now if we validate this and we say that the MD5 that we created is equal to the post key, then we're good. Okay, so that's a good indicator of things being in their place. So instead of coding everything with the database, what I usually do at this point is I call upon a function to do what I want. So example, add or insert album row. Or insert album, actually, just cleaner, smaller. And now we need to create that function. So usually when I start building these kind of things, maybe the code that I create isn't the only code that I plan on using. So a lot of the time, every single pieces of code and things related to making my program work, I create a little library folder which I short to lib, and then inside of this is where I'll store all the code that I create. And then for myself, when I start building a framework, obviously you can have your classes, you can have your objects, you can have all these different things. If it's a small thing like what we're doing now, then what I usually do is create a utils.php. And this is pretty much a series of functions, just a few different functions that are going to be used everywhere. And it's a lot better because it keeps the place where I need to make modification in one. Okay, so we need to include this file the same way. So we can say include and then lib and then utils.php. So it's inside this utils.php that we're going to create this insert album function. So it creates HTML by default. And then we're going to say function insert album. So the idea here is to do the prerequisites, to do the basic stuff like that has to deal with this specific page, the fact that it's an insert, the fact that we placed a key inside the form. All of this is very specific to this page. Now the code that we'll put insert inside album is a more generic code, a more simple code. Essentially the concept is take the variables that are in the post, clean them up, and put them in the database. So we talked about that the other day, about how important it is to not necessarily just add post values to the string so that your database doesn't get hacked. So I went ahead and basically got some sanitizing functions, and we're going to add this to our utils.php. Now we could take a look at this. Basically one is called clean input. What it does is it's an array of different patterns, okay, and this one strips out JavaScript, this one strips out HTML tag, this one strips out style, and then this one strips out any multi-line comments. Okay, so this is to clean the input of a general string that you try to add to your database. Sometimes you don't want people to add any kind of HTML or things like that. And then this sanitized one, makes use of the MySQL real escape string. Now this one is the older version, so we can use the MySQL I, and then we're also going to need our link here. This is important. So link, and then we can pass that here. Okay, so and then we could give it a default value, and then just check if, basically, if the link is there, and then if there is no link is the negation of this. So if link is false, we can actually create the link. Link is equal to, and then another way to do this is to create a connect function separately, but this is already using MySQL code here, so it's okay to do that. MySQL I connect two ends. And so these are the values that we need: the host, the username, the password, and the database name. So what I usually do in these scenarios is I store them as constant. So define example MySQL, or just example DB host, and then I'm going to define a few more. So DB user, DB pass, and database name. Okay, so the host is localhost, and also if you are on a server that you're hosting and it's on the internet, it probably is also localhost. The username is admin. The password is password, and then the database name is admin. Okay, so now we can use the constant to create our connection. So DB host, DB user, DB pass, and DB name. Okay, so in the event that we don't have an already open link, basically this is going to create the link just to be able to sanitize the string. Now most likely at the moment where we sanitize, we'll probably have a link already. Okay, so this pretty much goes through the values and checks that if the input is an array, it goes through all of them in the array and sanitizes them all. We call that a recursive function, a function that calls himself within it. And then here, this one is magic quote. So this is checking that if PHP has magic quotes on, then we have to strip slashes. And then I realized that if I was doing that yesterday without checking it, there was a problem. So then I clean the input, and then I escape the string, and then I return it as a clean variable. And then what's going to be awesome is also we can clean the entire post array all at once, and then be able to either use the post array as is, or use the values as the defined names that we have. Is that all right? So now let's insert our album. Pretty much an insert code is very simple. You write the connection, so we create the link. Basically we can actually copy this exact same line here. We create the link to the database. Once we have a link, we can run queries. So link, actually it's MySQL I query, so MySQL I query, and then that's where it uses the link, and then the query SQL, and then this will give us results. So okay, now in this case, if we just do an insert, the results are pretty much nothing, right? Because it just added it. So another thing that you can do here is, instead of saying return results like you would normally do if you would do a select, you can then create the result variable and say example, if this doesn't work, or then you could say example results is equal to MySQL error, and then you have to give it the link as well. Okay, so you create the results. You could say, example, if everything goes well, you can actually, I'm trying to do return results. Okay, so if everything goes well, basically results should be true. Okay, so we start by saying the results are going to be true because we hope it will be, and then essentially we create a link, then we run the query, and then in this part of the code here is where we're going to actually build the SQL needed to insert a data. So what is the SQL needed? Insert into, and then you name the table. So for instance, in our case, it's albums. And then you name the fields. So you want to insert the ID. You want to insert the artist. You want to insert the name of the album. You want to insert the genre. And then you want to insert the year. Now, you probably noticed they're not in the same order as in the database, but that doesn't matter. The album art. As long as they're in the same order as you provide them. That's the important part. You need to provide them in that order. So the values, and then this is where you're going to actually list the values. So I'm going to keep going here and say SQL. And then continue to add to it the values. So example, the first value should be null because we want it to create automatically. The second value should be a string, so we're going to put the string values. The third value is going to be a string again. And then the year is numeric, so we're just going to write a dummy year. And then the album art should be a string again. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So we forgot one, right? We forgot the name. Well, we just forgot one, maybe not the name. Okay, so now we got this. So usually then, once I'm happy with this, I can close my string, and I know where I need to fill in the information, right? So in this case, what we can do is sanitize the post array, either create them one by one. That's what I would do probably. So example, we are going to collect the artist, and it's going to be equal to, and then we're going to sanitize the underscore post artist. Okay. And I don't know if you remember as well, last time what I did is I said, actually let's do this. Let's sanitize the entire post array all at once. And then here we could say the same thing I taught you guys the other day. If you open this will be an if statement. Now in the event that is true, you put a question mark, and the condition here, the value for the true will be on this side, and then the value for the false will be on this side. So what if? Well, example, if $_post artist, and now it's clean, right? Now it's been sanitized. If post artist is empty, so has no value, then we can, we can set it to, I don't know, a default value or something. And then if not, oh, actually I went to the wrong place. If it's empty, this would be the default value, and if it's not empty, then we say post. Now I know this is not really useful, but in a lot of cases, if something's empty, you do want to either stop the code or you want to put in actually a value to make sure that it makes sense when you try to add it Oh, I see a mistake here, artist. So if the value, let's do it the other way around. If it's not empty, make it the post artist. If not, make it an empty string. That's usually the way I have it in a lot of my code. So the artist, the name, the genre, the year, the album art, and you saw yesterday how we played around with the genre. So it actually will be useful for the genre more than any of the others. So the artist, the album, the genre, the year, and then the URL. These are all the variables that we created. So the album, the genre, the year, and the URL. Now actually we could put them in here. So we stop this, then we add, the first one is the artist. And then we can copy this and just place it here, change it for the album. And that would be the name of the album. This would be the genre. And then here we're going to put the year. And then here the album art. That's the URL. So for instance, now you see that there's, because of this prior line and these prior blocks, it becomes really easy to manipulate and check that. Example, the year, for instance, the year should be numeric. So if it's not empty and is numeric, and then we could check post year. Okay, so now I'm doing these in if statements that are like that are on one line. You could say, you know what, I don't have enough flexibility on one line. I want to do it in normal if statements. So you could just easily say if, and then grab the if statement here, and basically one side is true, the other side is false. Okay, and then you could take the year and give its value inside. So in instance, if it's numeric and everything's good, you could put it here, and if not, then it's an empty string. So it's the same result, right? Now let's just end this line correctly. Now it's the same result, but there could be some things that could be made. For instance, we started the results as being true, but we could always do some checks as this is going down now. Maybe you guys were wondering the other time because we didn't really address validating the form, and you know, we didn't see that as a problem. But this would be the way you would normally do it, is that in the case that the year is not numeric, well, you would make the year empty, fine, but you could say the results are like some kind of an error message that would say, you know, the year needs to be numeric, right? So you can address this by checking this when you get the results, okay? And obviously, by the time you run the query, okay, because the query is the one who's going to determine the results, well, you could still check if the results are still true. I mean, if you're still interested in getting results, basically run the query. So if it's true, it means nothing went here and nothing happened and didn't turn into a string. You see that? So this is where things become really interesting, because now you can do a lot of the validation. You can proceed with writing messages and send them back out of the function to the page. And then example, when you do the insert album, you're doing it here at the top. So you could say, you know, example, the messages or the results essentially, and then you could check if that exists. To put like the same thing like we did last time, like a little bubble there. So if we go to the Bootstrap, we can find some notification areas, and we could see those dismissible alerts, and then we could pick one like either a warning or an error, and then we could just adjust these things as we go. Okay, We're probably going to need to do this actually just to make sure, because we may have errors. I'm going to copy as HTML. This is another way to do it. I'm just going to bring in this container down here, and I'm going to update the page, see what it looks like. This is not the right page. Okay, so it failed to include the utils because I didn't upload it. And then you can see like suddenly everything here turned into the alert. So it would be good to check why this happened. Probably because we also need a column or even a row for this one. So a row and a column for the message. Okay, so the div, and we could close this here, and we'll put the message in it. And then I want to see what it looks like. Perfect. So we would have our message here, and then we could dismiss it if there's any issue. Perfect. So now basically if we go back to our utils function, we're just going to kind of quickly say we create a variable results, we create a connection to the database, we sanitize every part of the post array, and then basically we do these checks. If the artist is set, then we get the value. If the album is set, then we get the value. If the genre is set, then we get the value, and store it all in these temporary variables. Now we check extra things. This is another example. You can check that the year has a value, it's not empty, but also that it's numeric before you actually accept it. And then if it's not, then the year can be empty again, and then the results need to be numeric. Actually, I can show you another way to make the results even more flexible and how you can play with it afterwards, probably in another video. Then the URL, and then you run the query, insert into albums, then you give the values, and then if the results are still true, which means we never changed it, then you run the query. If not, you get the error. So if we look at this page here, it's going to create the messages. We could go here and create the messages as an empty message, and then we could create a PHP block here for the notification. Now this will be another part of another demo maybe, where I'm going to show you how you can make this into a function instead of into the flow, but it's still pretty good. So if the messages are not empty, so if there's something in the messages, then we need to echo a message. We're pretty much going to assume that it's an error for now, and then we need to close that if statement. Okay, so now if the messages are not empty, we've tried inserting the album basically, and then we got back with something. This is what happened. So we did actually a lot of code without any test, so hopefully we won't get too many errors, but it's time for a good test before we finish this. So we've uploaded this, we've uploaded the utils. We're going to refresh this, and we're gonna add another album. Okay, so let me see here. Where's my admin interface? And I want the albums. So now we're gonna add exhibit. Oh, actually, we have the albums from yesterday. So Restless 2000, and then that's the hip hop rap, and then this file here is the link to the album cover. We can just make sure it is. Yes, it is. And then we're gonna click add album. So now we know we have the error here, but actually we could check if there was anything added. So we didn't check everything, but we know it worked. Everything worked. It's now here in the database. So probably we'll figure out why we got something that wasn't empty in our message. Oh yeah, we check that it's empty, but it's actually true. You see what I'm saying? We send back true. So when it said it wasn't empty, and also that it's not true. Okay, because if it's true, there's no problem. But actually, we don't want to do that, because then we could check if it's not empty, and then we could say if it's true, then it's a success. That we can make a notification successfully added the album, right? So we'll deal with the notifications in the next video. Okay. So we still need to see in the next video how we're going to be able to build the views and select those records and display them in the table. And then pretty much we're going to address a lot of these things that we probably started in this video in the next one.